Hello there, my name is Odira Wangu from Kodarasa, and today we're going to talk about domain modeling. What do we mean when we say domain modeling? Oh, this is domain modeling in domain-driven design. Yeah, it belongs to the series, but I thought to mention that. Let's get into domain modeling. We'll define some terms while we're doing that. For one, what is the software model? This is the way the software expresses the solution to the business goal being sought. That's what we mean when we say the software model, when we talk about the model. What's the domain model? It's a software model of the specific business domain you're working in. We'll get to know more about that as we go, so don't stress if this feels like very big words. Using DDD, you will no longer try to model the whole business enterprise with a single large domain model. You'll break it down into smaller parts so that you understand it better, so that you get to internalize it better and handle them as their own parts, instead of looking at it in a complex way, which makes it very complicated. It is often implemented as an object model. We'll have the object, the data it contains, the methods and behaviors, that is the verbs, etc., etc. The model needs to be unique and carefully crafted. So this is going to be a process, a very intentional process when you're doing this. So it does need to be unique. Domain models will tend to be small and very focused. I've mentioned that we shouldn't try to model it as a whole. We should try to break it down to smaller parts so that we can model them better to handle our use cases and to understand them better. The subject area to which the user applies is what we mean when we talk about the domain of the software. Use DDD to simplify, not to complicate. You need to weigh when to use DDD. The goal is to simplify what you're creating in the first place and not just make it a whole complex thing or apply it anywhere you want. Look at it, assess if it's worth the work for your project in this case, and then use it, because it will be very beneficial once you do that. Use DDD to model a complex domain in the simplest possible way. That's what I just mentioned. It may not apply to all your cases. Sometimes something is very simple and straightforward. You don't need to use all these DDD concepts to model it. But when it's something complex, it does help using it, because it helps break it down into smaller parts, and then you get to understand it better. And the more you go, the more you model a better, instead of having spaghetti code, a ball of mud, for lack of a better word. And of course, never use DDD to make your solution more complex. Focus on the aspects relevant to solving the problem at hand and ignore extraneous details. Just put in what's required. Anything extra, remove it. To truly create valuable software that satisfies the user's activities, the team needs to fully comprehend the knowledge involved to carry out these activities. So go get those domain experts. Go get people who've worked on this project for so long, people who actually understand, and then also take your time to understand it. Take your time to dig into the documents, into business, anything, until you actually understand it, then model it. Ideally, a model is a selectively simplified and consciously structured form of knowledge. That's what it is. The information can be daunting, complex, and a lot. Then we take the time to model it by breaking it down, by understanding it better, by seeking people who know it better, by reading more about it, a lot of that. So we've understood what a model is. What is it not? A domain model is not, one, a particular design doc. It's not a particular diagram, because you can think those are what they are. It is the idea that the design doc, the diagrams, all those that they are trying to convey. That's what a domain model is. Not just the knowledge in a domain expert's head, because you can't go seek a domain expert and take everything they say word for word and be like, yeah, this is what constitutes of the domain. But no, we need to break it down. We need to have a language between the developers and these domain experts. We need to iterate, get better language. We need to take our time and, even out the concepts until we find a really good working model that everyone understands, that is actually makes sense and fits what we're trying to create for at the end of the day. It's a rigorous organization and selective abstraction of this knowledge from the domain experts, from the books, from all that. It can be communicated through different things: a diagram, code, a simple sentence, anything. What is it not? It is not a matter of making a realistic a model as possible. What do I mean when I say this? Sometimes we try to remember we can't fully put everything together and capture everything. Sometimes we need to do our assessment of whether some things fit and others don't fit, and it's a trade-off. So we're not trying, for instance, let me give an example of using Google Maps. I can make a point of even tracking all the street lights. We're trying to make it as realistic as possible. But is that relevant to our clients at the end of the day? I may not care about the street lights. Maybe someone who works on the road part, who's like an engineer who's responsible for doing that, cares about the street lights. I don't care about the street lights as a passenger. I don't care. They're important to me, but I care about the routes. I care about where the petrol station is. I care about finding restaurants near me. See, these are things that are actually important to the user. But we don't need to maybe use this road is A001. That information may not be important to the user. But if I say Maua Meru Highway, that makes more sense because they know what Maua is, what Meru is, and they can connect the two and understand what you're referring to. But when you use the codes used by road constructors and all, they may not understand what you're referring to. So it is not a matter of making as realistic a model as possible. It is a matter of bringing in what's relevant to the user, to the clients at the end of the day. We also need to remember it is not the construction of a software mechanism that gives the necessary results. At the end of the day, this is an artificial creation. This it didn't exist. It's a model created out of nothing. A domain modeler will choose a particular model for its utility. So what does the model represent? We've checked what it is not, we've checked what it is. So what does it represent? The model and the heart of the design shape each other. They should flow into each other. Let me give an example. This is a model. I've maybe put the design docs and all, and the code. These two need to map into each other to a point where someone who's not a developer can look at the code and understand what we're talking about, because the code literally reflects what we discussed in the domain model, in the design docs, in the diagrams. They map into each other. Changes on both ends should be reflected. So when I make changes on the domain model, on the design docs, on whatever, I also need to effect these changes on the code so that they are at par at all points. The model is the backbone of a language used by all team members. Even someone who's not a developer should be able to look at your code and understand what you are referring to. They may not understand the details of the code, or why you used a constructor here, or if this is a constructor or not. That's not their business. But if I look at maybe a class that was created, I look at a factory or whatever you're working with, they need to understand what you are referring to, at least from a vague place. Domain experts and developers should use the same language. The domain is distilled knowledge. We've taken all the noise and distilled it into what is actually important. Let's look at ingredients of effective modeling. Bind the model and the implementation. Another ingredient is cultivating a language based on the model. Another ingredient is developing a knowledge-rich model. There is also distilling the model. And lastly, we need to brainstorm and experiment. So these are some ingredients when creating a model, when doing modeling, for effective modeling. That is, interaction between the team members will keep changing as you keep improving the model. Remember, you're learning more, getting better vocabulary for things. Because of this, you'll have maybe an easy interaction as you go. From maybe when you started out, this one was referring to this and this one was referring to this, and you had to take time to explain to each other what you mean. But as you go and create the same language and start speaking the same language, then there's that harmony, there's that speaking the same language, and it has changed for the better at the end of the day. Constant refinement of the domain model results in the developers learning the important principles of the business they're building software for. They'll not just produce functions mechanically. Maybe in the past you'd just be told, do this, and then you just go create as a function, do what you needed to be told. But this time you're more interested in, oh, this is what it actually means from a business standpoint. When you talk about profit, how is profit achieved in this case? It's from this, like you understand the calculation, how they, and not just from a vague standpoint of calculating it, but you actually get to know how this is impacting the customers, etc., etc. You've taken the time to understand how the business people came to this calculation in the first place, and then that will reflect in your code. Domain experts often refine their own understanding. Also, remember, you're not just, as a developer, you're not the only ones learning from them. They're also learning from you. But the questions you ask, they get to understand better. They get to distill the knowledge they have to just essentials. They may come with a lot. Like, for instance, when you talk about someone like a CEO, they have a very broad view of the company, and we're speaking about a specific domain, so they are going to go to the details of that specific model, that specific small part of the business, and get to the details of it, and even get to understand it better. They understand the conceptual, there are effort required to build software. So not only that, they're actually understanding the developer's side of things. They understand the trade-offs they have to make. They understand the questions that go through. It's not just do this and then they go implement it. They do understand all that is required when creating a software. At the end of the day, it is a continuous learning process. This is both for the domain experts and the developers. When developing a software project, you hardly know enough. The knowledge you need is also scattered in many places. It can be in people's heads, it can be lost, it can be, like, let's say a fire happened and we lost a lot of documents. It can be mixed with other information. It can be in files that we can't easily reach, or we do have the files but we don't know exactly where this information exists. And of course, also getting it from the brains of people and not knowing who to get this information from. It's scattered. So what you're trying to do is bring all this information together. It's hard to know what we really need when starting out. It is common to assume a domain is less technically daunting when it is. We are oblivious to what we don't know and ignorant, leading to false assumptions. This is why we have issues like estimating wrong estimates when it comes to time or the complexity. Not just the time, it's also the effort required. It's also the resources required, because even needing people, at the end of the day, if I need domain experts, I need to actually book their time, which takes time out of the day. So I need to plan for that instead of just last minute realizing, oh, I did need to speak to so and so, and then you have to get these emergency meetings at the end of the day, which is not good because you did not plan it right. Something else that comes up when you're modeling is you remember that projects, you'll find out really quickly that projects leak knowledge, causing knowledge to be fragmented again. People with the knowledge we need could be fired, they could leave the organization, they could be scattered into different teams in the organization. A lot of this information is lost, and that's something you find out. Outsourcing may create the needed software, but the knowledge will not be transferred. So let's say go and tell an outside company to create this design for me. They'll do that, but they will not transfer knowledge. They may not even focus on design documents. They're not inside the organization, so they may not really take the time to understand and feel like it, all that, in a way that people maybe who are in-house do. So at the end of the day, you're not transferring, and they may do that and then they don't actually leave anything behind. They don't have training sessions, and that's not on them. You paid them to build a software. That's what they were supposed to do, and that's not surprising that we end up in that scenario in the first place. Typically, designs by team don't express gathered information on usable form, both on the code and the documents, which leads to knowledge loss. An example is, of course, what I've just said when outsourcing, but even in typical teams, you've gone to teams that have zero documentation, or the documentation is very, very outdated. So in that case, we do have a lot of knowledge loss. We don't know even how we got here in the first place. And the people who could have explained that have left the company. So what do we do in this case? We're left with just a scenario where we don't have that knowledge transference, where we have knowledge loss. Building a knowledge-rich design. How do we go about that? During design, you need to capture more than the nouns. It's easy to go for the nouns, but you need to look at the business activities. You need to look at the business roles. For success, focus on all aspects, not just the nouns. Like I said, the verbs, the adjectives, the roles. Inconsistencies are also captured in the process. Also get to understand what doesn't feel right and capture that, because you do need that information too. The implementation, that is the code, should always reflect the changes captured as you go. I've mentioned this before. The code should always capture the changes in the ubiquitous language and stay updated on the same. Software does not rely on common sense, as domain experts do not navigate rules, resolve contradictions, and fill in gaps. What do I mean with this? Let's say I'm in the insurance business. I'm used to solving a specific problem in a specific way, because sensically it makes sense to calculate this, but remember, you can't tell the computer to have common sense to do that. You actually need to get a formula, get to the details of how to actually do this, instead of being like, oh yeah, every Sunday this happens. You do have to feed these instructions to a computer, and then it will be able to do the same job as you. Otherwise, you're left with a case where you do need to, like, at the end of the day, you do need to go to the details and find out how to do that from a formula standpoint, by understanding it more, by getting easier ways to do it, and not just saying, oh, this is what I do. At the end of the day, the computer doesn't understand that, so you do need to create better ways to do it. Because the roles are fleshed out, we don't have, like, everything's out of scope. These are some things, this is why we do need to create a ubiquitous language. This is why we need all the effort to do that in the first place. And that's it on domain modeling. My name is Zaidira Wangoi from Kodarasa. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe and follow for more. I'm almost done with the domain-driven design course, and I hope you did enjoy the course in the first place. Feel free to leave any comments, any suggestions. Hey, you can even tell me I'm doing a good job. I'd appreciate that. Anyway, thank you very much. Until next time, bye.